Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in this space. This week, it's episode 20 of season 2. We're going to talk around Microsoft XDR, Microsoft's holistic approach to extended detection and response. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm not doing too bad. How is this our last technical episode?
Exactly. Yeah. I should have called that out in the intro. To be totally honest with you, right? Yeah. Season, the end of season 2 is here. Yeah. It does seem pretty crazy. Am I right in thinking that we've successfully uploaded every week for 20 weeks? Is that right?
Y-
Were we that consistent at
yeah,
the start of? Is that
yeah,
right?
we've
Yeah.
done that. Yeah, somehow, yeah. There's been
Somehow,
a few
yeah.
close calls.
We had like a near on, was it a year gap or two? Was it that long? I can't remember. Was it two
Yeah,
years?
something like that.
Yeah, it was crazy, wasn't it? So as we've spoken about previously, this will be the last episode of this season. We're going to have a short break over the holiday period, get refueled and recharged, and get back into it early in the new year. Well, that's the current plan anyway.
Yeah, we got one more episode, haven't we? That's
Yeah,
recap in effect, but non-technical.
yeah, we're going to
Hopefully.
go through our best bits and just a, sort of a season finale. Probably not a super long episode, but yeah, just to recap and regroup and talk about next plans and things like that. So yeah, so without further ado, XDR. So just to give you a little bit of context, Alan and I we're not involved too heavily in XDR day to day, but it's definitely something that we are sort of learning and growing into trying to understand and really wrap our arms around. Alan, what's your sort of day to day on XDR? How does it fit in with your professional life?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely on the radar. Because I look after the Microsoft Defender products and Sentinel, we'll talk about it later, but kind of ties into all of that. But yeah, it's not probably my main thing at the moment,
Yeah,
but
I
probably
would
will be.
say as consultants, I think we are almost putting in a lot of these products that make up XDR. Right, we might not be there in terms of managing those clients, day to day. They might be part of, say, a managed service, or they might be managing themselves internally. But I think, and we'll talk about XDR because if you've got no exposure to it, we'll take you through it step by step. But as uh, uh, professional services consultants, we end up deploying a lot of these tools that make up these XDR, this XDR solution. So yeah, it's exciting to see a joined up and holistic viewpoint, which is great. So yeah,
Okay, then so let's get started then. So, um, I guess the first thing is what is XDR? What's it stand for? We kind of said about it in the start, but what does it actually mean?
yeah, and just a quick one. Alan and I are going to jump between this together because it's an area that we both got exposure to from different sides. So we're going to sort of there's no expert per se here on XDR. We're just going to bat it between each other. So XDR. So the XDR acronym stands for Extended Detection and Response. So, uh, in essence, this is a new way to approach threat detection, but also the response element of threat detection. There's many tools and sources um, inside an organization. Maybe generating logs. Maybe it's got its own. Maybe tooling that you've got has its own um, brain AI. However, it's it jumps from logs to alerts. So it's around having a holistic viewpoint of these all of these systems. but not also is it a holistic view, because I think we've had SIEM tools before that have brought, say, logs into one singular system. So in Microsoft's case, it's Microsoft Sentinel. But it's really about that like unified and holistic response mechanism. So what we mean by response, and a response can come in many forms. So for instance, a very simple response may be, um, we've detected the misuse of a global administrator account, let's say. you know we have the technology to make that detection. However that's set up, it doesn't really matter in this context. But then it's what happens in the response element. It's part of that incident. Is there automated response that we could go through? Are you set up for a more traditional manual response? And different businesses have very different needs when it comes to, say, response times, and the automation of their response as well. So really, what to use a let's use a really a concrete example, I suppose. um and correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, and please do guide me on this. But
Hmm.
the way that I see it is if we're talking about an endpoint response, um, then what we might say is something like, we have detected that a machine has potentially malware on it. Let's go ahead and from an automated perspective, remediate that machine. Maybe we'll isolate that machine. Maybe it's possible to actually remediate that malware before it's even taken hold, just detecting it and responding instantly. But then it's not just a case of very few incidents are fully isolated to a single machine. So that might be part of the attack chain. Or you maybe maybe you're an organization that maps across to the MITRE framework. So that's not the reconnaissance element of that attack. That's maybe the end step of it. So having the holistic view of what has happened across all of those tools, and maybe even responding earlier on in that attack chain, could be very beneficial to organizations.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. And the other view of it is that if you've got a solution, an XDR solution, that you're right, you've detected this malware, but where has it come from? That's kind of thing. So then you're checking your email solution. Does that email solution see it go through? Is there something you can remediate there to stop it? Is it a phishing email or a malware email that's got through 0 day? You've detected that, or the system's now detected that in this XDR solution. It's now gone off to the mail, the email security, and gone, right, now can you purge that email from everyone's mailboxes? So that, you're stopping the attack, or the potential for the spread of the compromise if people have clicked on it.
Yeah,
Yes, EDR should kick in everything, but you're finding up the chain, the block, the kill chain, what's caused what sort of thing. So it's
yeah.
covering that side of things as
Yeah,
well.
and I think the way that I sort of see it, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, but if you imagine all of your different tooling and areas, right, as little silos that you maybe have at the moment, right? Maybe you've got your EDR solution, and then you've got X, Y, and Z. Maybe you've got a couple of the defenders turned on and things like that. But it requires, let's say, a human to orchestrate all of those things to work effectively, doesn't it? Right? If you detect you know if you detect something in one system, then the only way that you're going to get some sort of response, like you say, you detect malware on one machine. That's your like your EDR silo there. And then you've got, okay, I now need to go to my email system. There's another silo of technology and logic and a process in one other area. But what if we could join those things up? Maybe we're lucky enough that they're inside of the same like technology ecosystem, and they can talk to each other. I think that is really what's important. So yeah, correlation of incidents is a massive I think a massive part, a big driver for XDR. And we'll talk about incident correlation in a bit more depth. But we're essentially saying that we want to see a complete picture of that attack chain, right? From hopefully, if we've got things correctly configured, when we're doing that hunting, we should be able to see each of those, as much information in one holistic place, unified place, in order to make our hunting as effective as possible, right? Which I think does go beyond just a Sentinel itself, right? Because Sentinel can have a bunch of information fed into it, but when you've got other SaaS tooling and tooling that's building its own alerts and its own intelligence, then that is another step above that, right? That is something that's slightly different.
Yeah, definitely. That yeah, whilst you can get all the logs into one place, like you said, there may be some additional context that you don't see in logs from another system because it's third party, it's trademarked or something. They don't want to pull that out. It has to be in that portal or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe. But yeah, there
yeah.
is
Because
that, and
because the thing is, what the way I sort of see Sentinel and Seam is, it's kind of like you bring it up, and then it's like a blank canvas ready to sort of build your own, to your detect library of analytic rules and detections and things like that, right? There's, and don't get me wrong, there's absolutely tons of content there that's ready for you to absorb, right? And to get massive effectiveness out of. But you have to do that yourself, right? You have to do that glue, if you will, breaking down those silos, like, by yourself. That's almost the benefit and the benefit and the downside of that scenario, right? Is because you have to have the
yeah.
knowledge to glue everything together, like, correctly, if that makes sense.
Well, it's also correlating all the data, make sure it's in the right format and everything. Yes, Microsoft have made it easier to do with some of the standards they've got and things like that. But every product is different in how it brings those alerts out. Might be some information, might not be all the information. Yeah, it depends on the data source and things like that. And you're right, you there is loads of content there for those products, and generally to do, I guess, detections against multiple sources. But if you've got a unique combination, then you're going to have to build that in effect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. So yeah, analytics around the event itself. Attempting to build, from a viewpoint of XDR, attempting to build a timeline for those correlated incidents into one unified a timeline. um, Automated detect and response. So this is where we are identifying, remediating threats in real time. So that is a an automated layer of protection, but in those specific workloads, right? Driven by the technology in those individual workloads. So we're not talking around, you know, um, um, you know, saw capability in Sentinel and managing that yourself, like, running out um to logic apps to build those, custom automations. We're saying first party detect and response, and I think auto healing is part of that, right? We see that with EDR around, malware removal and things like that. All of those, systems are interconnected and working autonomously for you, right? So you don't have to build that glue yourself effectively, right?
Well, yeah, and that those environments where it's in effect built in is you don't have to maintain it. You don't have to keep it up to date. If an
No,
API
exactly.
changes or new functionality comes in, it's there.
Well,
That sort of
yeah.
thing.
Well, the way that I saw, kind of saw it was that, if if ingesting everything into your seam is like DIY, right? And I don't know the best way. If it's like pass, let's say it's pass, right? Like platform as a service. They're giving you a platform and you configure it as you like, right? I actually think it's more SaaS, but in this like in this analogy, let's call it pass, right? And then you've got XDR, which is utilizing Sentinel, but you're effectively and you can do all of those things, or that glue together, bring in third parties. We'll talk about that later. That's still important. But in terms of certain workloads feeding into Sentinel, what we're saying, it's more like a SaaS model where we're saying, onboard Defender for endpoint, connect it to Sentinel, and like let it work. Like let it flow its alerts in, let it flow its data in. But when it comes to event correlation and building of timelines and all of that juicy analytics for you, let those tools deal with it. And like, to your point, let them maintain it. Let the people that build those tools and what you're licensed for and you're paying for build that glue for you automatically. I mean, there is an element of trust there that we suppose we have to talk about as well, because you know like it is a black box at that point, right? So how do you know how do you guarantee these things? But I think it is adding a lot of flexibility there. Okay, so I think that's a brief primer on XDR. Is there anything else, Alan, that you want to go through on XDR? Anything you think I've missed or you think is worth capturing?
No, I think we've sort of captured it where you've captured it quite well. It is, as it sounds, it's bringing that extra data in and the sort of connectivity of all those products as well. It's not just the logs being connected; it's about the products as well.
Okay. So can we move on from sort of a high level theory of XDR, and let's try and link XDR to some real world, the framework, the topology of XDR. Would you be okay to take us through like a high level overview of the sort of products that feed into XDR that make up that solution?
Yeah, sure. So this kind of we've talked about it could be these products communicating between each other. Do you want this, Sam, in the context of Microsoft or as a generic thing?
Yeah, I think let's talk about Microsoft XDR. I think because
Okay.
because because what it will do is it will frame us right into the their unified sort of ecosystem, if that makes sense, and it will keep it relatively nice and neat for the podcast, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So Microsoft's view of XDR is bringing in some of the their Defender products. So we'll split this into it's kind of three actually, isn't it? So we'll talk about Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft 365 Defender as a whole, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So how does that break down? Why are they sort of the XDR sort of products? So Microsoft 365 Defender um, brings in all of the Microsoft Defender products. So that includes Defender for Identity, which is covering your on-premise identity. So you're bringing that data in. You've got your Defender for Endpoint, so that is bringing all your endpoint security EDR capability. You've got Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps, so that is looking at Office 365, any SaaS apps that are communicating with that, as well as anything that is going through the uh, conditional access access control, so you can see what people are doing. You've got Microsoft Defender for Office, so again, that is bringing all your email and SharePoint and OneDrive and that as well. And some of the other products as well, we've kind of talked about it in some of the other sort of episodes, like Defender for Endpoint can also bring in visibility of your IoT devices in that environment. So that brings those very large areas all into one place, which is the Microsoft 365 Defender portal, and we've talked about this quite a bit. But that Microsoft 365 Defender engine is in effect XDR on its own, because it is pulling all this information in, correlating for you. You've got all those events in one place. You can hunt, advanced hunt through all of those different, piece of information. But they've also built in all the remediation. And one, you can do it all through the portal. It will do it automatically in some scenarios. They've now recently brought in the attack disruption all that's coming in, where it will actually do something to stop an attack happening, rather than in effect when something's happened, then we'll remediate. So it's actually detecting stuff coming in. Um, and and yeah, like I kind of suggested before, when we see an email on or a malware being opened on a endpoint, we can track that hash of that file to an email, and then Defender for Office will go and pull it out of all, purge all of the emails to stop that attack that way. So it's just showing that sort of mainly automated piece, but also the APIs are there for all those products in one place that you can do that some of that remediation. So we may jump out in Sentinel to a playbook, but we don't have to build some real custom pieces. We just call the API and say isolate this device or contain this IoT device, purge this email, etc. Or even now today with Defender for Identity, uh, disable this account on premise. AD. I mean, if you think about today, I personally think the only way you do that is by in an Azure environment is create an Azure automation to then go and talk to something on premise to then run a PowerShell script to do that. You think of all those things you've got to look after and keep
Yeah.
up to date.
And
You
maintain,
know,
yeah, maintain, yeah,
there's
exactly, yeah,
there's loads
yeah,
of different moving parts there, and what happens if it doesn't work? That you've got all that risk.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
Go
because and it's interesting that you say that, 365 Defender, because now it's all sort of merged into, the Defender like portal, right?
Yeah,
It is kind of like its own mini XDR, right?
yeah.
It's already got that joined up, thinking. And I what really sort of resonated when you were describing it there as well to me was how it's it's not just providing you that black box and that joined up, thinking and its own capability and feature set, let's call it that, right? It's not just giving you that, but it's also enabling you the ability to create advanced automations in playbooks, and opening up functionality to you as a business, to like I'll take the automated isolation of a device, right? Like I detect malware. No, I detect ransomware. I'm going to isolate this device just for good measure. Do you see what I'm saying? The tooling might not take it to that level, right? It might not say, okay, no, actually, that would be too disruptive for us, for Microsoft to say this is the response. This is the response that we think should be, automatically
Well,
enacted, because it
well,
could be quite dangerous, right?
I was going to say, can you imagine, it automatically isolating the whole network
Yeah,
of
exactly.
devices? That's
I
it.
can just imagine that's just not a product
10,000
engineering
devices. That's
tool
it. God,
that
can't talk.
Microsoft are going to have that conversation about. But an organization might say, it might say, okay, for this subset of users, if we ever saw ransomware, we're just going to isolate their machine, right? We're going to take the risk of potential disruption to their device, but we're going to protect whatever network they're on, not just our internal network, but, because these solutions are on endpoint, right? It's not a network,
Hmm.
level solution, right? So it's effectively at any time, um, IT, instead of the networking and infrastructure team, can isolate a device if they deem that they need to. And like you say, the API to isolate a device is exposed, well, via like a REST API, but also in logic apps. There's very easy, connectors and actions there to automate these things. So where there are, and this is what I think Microsoft is really good at, is leaving some great gaps for people, right, and not overreaching in terms of, their full, which is sometimes a bit of a bit of a downside, because they don't plug every gap, right? But they do leave enough flexibility for people to approach things in their own way, right? And not overbearing all these products with too many really complex, like configuration options, onboarding options, and things like that. You could criticize that on the other side, devil's advocate and all that, is that they're leaving out functionality that, other third parties would include, as part of it, and you don't have to like pay a partner to come and help you. But what I think they strike a good balance of is giving you this automation, this ability to do things, but then also giving you the ability to build on top of that in your organization. Because even if you even if you are an organization like an end customer, of these products, not like us, where we're a partner, if you're an end organization, chances are you've probably got technical people in your business who may want to plug those gaps in to build those and maintain those solutions on top of these products, right? So I think I don't think it's debilitating for organizations. What do you think about that, Alan? Do you think that's a positive thing that they're leaving
Y-
those gaps there for people?
Yeah, I think having the flex, like you said, the flexibility or the capability to be able to do customization is key, because there is always those unique scenarios that someone's got, and instead of trying to build that into the product and wait for the release and everything, they're leaving it open. Not open, but they're leaving it so that it can be interpreted in many ways, because there are different processes, things like that. But outside of that, I think what we've got to kind of also talk about is that if Microsoft 365 Defender is like a mini XDR, how easy is this for small businesses just to consume? Think, you don't have to have 20 products to give you this holistic view of everything. It is, you're almost building like, your small business, your 10 to 20 users, maybe up to 300, maybe, you haven't got to, it's not that complex to kind of set up. You may want to have some sort of management on top of it. That might be true, but it's quite easy and kind of simple to understand what you need to get to get your full view, I guess. That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, or if you do need to engage a third party, how much smaller that engagement actually is, right? And more accessible, because you could effectively just go if you were a smaller business but you wanted like I'll call it like enterprise grade security, right? And visibility, right? And I hate those words because it makes me sound like I'm selling firewalls or something like that, right? Um um, but you could effectively go and buy, say, E5, like bells and whistles, right? And sort of say, money's no object because I don't have relatively as many users, right? Um, and then for a relatively small engagement, you could effectively turn on a lot of these like 365 Defender products really rapidly, right? Couldn't you? Then
Mm,
flow them into, and I suppose you'll talk about Sentinel in a minute, but then flow them into Sentinel. There wouldn't be a huge amount of data going into Sentinel, so your costs wouldn't be crazy, right? But you would get this, joined up, viewpoint, for sure. For okay, yes, you would pay for uprated licensing to get that value in all of those things. You'd have to be fully in Microsoft's ecosystem, but it could well be done, right? Completely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's not the problem, but the concern, I guess, I feel for small businesses is that cost, and having to buy certain, multiple products, this AV or EDR solution, this for to secure. If I've got a small AD, got to do this to do other things, and it's everywhere, and you've got 5 contracts to deal with, and they all change at the different times and
Yeah,
etc. Or they all need specialist people. You can't maybe have one vendor that can look after all of them, maybe as
yeah,
well. It's all that sort of stuff as well.
yeah, definitely, 100%.
Okay, so Microsoft 365 Defender. Let's quickly go on to Defender for Cloud. And we've talked about Defender for Cloud in the past, but this is looking at your cloud IaaS PaaS environment. So this is Azure, uh, AWS, and GCP. This is bringing that information about that environment. What's happening on the management side of things. What's the networking. What's happening with your app service and key vaults and or your key storage and etc. and containers. Um, SQL. So this is bringing all that information that you may not be able to see, or would be you just see logs for it per se with no remediation, that you can grab and pull that into Defender for Cloud. And we've talked about it from a CS, cloud security posture management, and some of the protective workloads in a lightweight way. We didn't go into those too much detail last time because it was all about CSPM at the time. But
Yeah.
yes, it's all automatic remediation in the clouds, in clouds, mainly Azure, but does push out to AWS and GCP, and that technology is growing. So that's bringing all that information into one place in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Um, is there anything else, Sam, around Defender for Cloud that I've missed? We've kind of talked a lot about Defender 365, and yes, Defender for Endpoint would be deployed in Defender for Cloud, so that information would go about the endpoints. But this is more about infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if we split the two sides, if you've got 365 Defender as like your, I'll call it like IT in your
Yeah,
organization, if you know, um IT, but I suppose Defender for Endpoint is in there as well, so it does get they are all a bit intermixed. But if we think about it in like big blobs, you got the 365 Defender that's like IT, and then you've got because in the new world, like well how we build now in the cloud, our infrastructure is slowly, well, not some organization, not fully, migrating into cloud workloads, right? Your on-prem, you know, uh, app servers that you would have had, in your basement data center in your organization, may now be sitting in Azure. They don't have to be, but maybe they are now, and Arc will cover you for any issues with that. But the point that I'm trying to make is if you think you've got IT people, endpoints, the devices, that sort of thing, behavior, documents, SharePoint, all that sort of stuff. And then Defender for Cloud is really infrastructure and understanding that. And I think, like you said, we haven't really talked about protective workloads. And I think we should talk about, maybe do an episode on protective workloads, because they are important. Because we've talked about CSPM, which is just showing you how to remediate and your gaps in your config and all of those different things. But what we haven't really talked about is what protective workloads are doing for you from a response perspective,
mm,
right? And
yeah.
also a detailed like logging perspective. Um, Understanding what your SQL servers are doing. In the cloud is really important. Who's accessing it? Is there any anomalies in access? Um, have you just created like one app user, and for some reason that app user is now being connected from a remote IP address because you accidentally left the firewall open? Like, that's a really dumb example, but like these things happen on a daily basis. And what I think about the cloud, and I think why I'm such an advocate of Defender for Cloud, is that because cloud's really my area. Like, 365 Defender, I do get involved with, especially on the IoT side, but all of that stuff is really what I class as IT. So Defender for Cloud for me is somebody that lives in Azure, and that's like my sort of area. Is It's just constantly watching. It's kind of like this, big brother, constantly telling me like what I'm doing wrong. Because we have all been there. Like we've all been there where we've opened a port to do something and then we forget about it, right? You need something that's going to then say, oh, by the way, that port that you left open, well, it's been open for 6 weeks. Maybe you should think about looking at that. And some of the protective workloads can get expensive, can they? We know when you add them all up, it can get a bit like crazy, especially if you've got a lot. But the only thing I'd say is that your total bill for Defender for Cloud is going to be a lot less than a human having to look at that. If you were to manually do it. So if you were diligently checking your cloud infrastructure manually, you would spend a lot more money, in my opinion, than Defender for Cloud. You know, it would be an absolute no-brainer. But unfortunately, a lot of organizations aren't even doing that due diligence. They're putting systems infrastructure in place, and then they're moving on to the next project. And then you have this this security um, gap, and this problem that can rear its ugly head later on down the line. So Defender for Cloud is really solidifying that benchmarking and monitoring.
And one piece I did miss out of our little like initial talk about Defender for Cloud was infrastructure IoT, because that becomes a real big area, and we kind of briefly talked about some of that at one point about Defender for IoT. Um, but yeah, it's that in itself is really infrastructure, isn't it? Really, it's not. It isn't endpoints per se. It is just detecting what's happening on that infrastructure, that network, isn't it? And
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
those potential attacks, because again, getting that information about what might be happening on an OT environment, and then correlating against Defender for Endpoint or email
yeah,
to understand how something got in, it shows the big picture. And
yeah,
that kind of, we'll come back to quickly to IoT, but that kind of ties into Microsoft Sentinel, bringing these two products, these two big product suites together to see that holistic view.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And just touching on IoT specifically, because IoT is a weird and wonderful world, right? About there's lots of different viewpoints of IoT, right? And what an IoT device actually is. And you know, you could put you could put 10 different devices on a desk in front of you. They would all be classed as IoT, and they would do very different things. The way that I sort of view it is that 365 Defender is for things that are operated by people, like humans, maybe like endpoints, things like that. That It does also cover servers for Defender, but yeah, just there is some other there is a few there's a few things that criticize my viewpoint there. But if you imagine, 365 Defender, things that people operate, and Defender for Cloud for things that are cloud connected in some way, that are just operated autonomously. They do a job. They're an application. They're a service. And when we talk about industrial IoT, we're talking about op, you know OT sensors, operational technology. Like, let's say you have a factory, and let's say your factory makes ice cream, and you've got temperature sensors, because I like ice cream, so I'll talk about ice cream. Um, Maybe you've got temperature sensors in your fridges and freezers, which modulate when they turn on and off, right? And it would be, and we've heard this, these problems in the industries before, where um, um, people have got into systems and turned off these, and disabled these types of temperature thermometers, or inverted their values, so that things spoil quickly, and things like that, and actually do destructive actions to them. So what, for instance, uh, Defender for IoT from an OT perspective is it's not cloud connecting that network, because that would be absolutely nuts, right? Because of how OT works. We should just do an episode on OT, because it's a bit weird and wild. Until I'd got some visibility of it, I just didn't realize how like insane OT can be. Um, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to observe that network and feed the analytics that we observe from that network straight up into Defender for IoT, and then hopefully straight into Sentinel at that point, right? Because because lateral movement inside of organizations is huge, right? Because if you imagine your OT network to, let's say your factory, as a factory, more than likely the most important, well, probably a finance function as well, but your finance function and your factory floor are probably your factory floor is probably the most important thing, from an operational perspective. So protecting that is very, very, very vital. And what we've seen a lot is we've seen lateral movement from corporate IT networks into OT networks. So they first infiltrate corporate IT networks that have vulnerabilities or access, issues, and then they will laterally move into OT networks that should be effectively, but not, air gapped between, enterprise IT systems. So so when Microsoft talks about this timeline, attack chain, whatever wording you want to use for it, understanding somebody doing reconnaissance on your network. Maybe somebody's got access to your OT network, and they're running port scanning software on it to understand what the devices are on that network. If you've got Defender for IoT looking at that OT network, it can detect those, because it's looking at every single packet that flows through that network. So you've got, if you've got this tooling in place, and I'm not just some Microsoft shill, because like this is like XDR. This is, there are other products and tools to do this sort of thing. We just happen to like the Microsoft flavor of it. Um, if you can see that timeline of, phishing email went in, malware payload delivered, pwn the operators, you know, from some open source intelligence, they worked out who the operator was of that, or managed that, factory line.
Yeah.
Pwn that machine, laterally move into the OT network, because chances are they've probably opened a few ports to their thing so they can look at some management interfaces or get the data. Do you know what I mean? Like that
Yeah,
is a
without going into the factory to go and look at it manually. That's just RDP to it because I don't
without a
want to
doubt,
go
because I
in there.
can't be bothered to walk into the. I got to put my ear defenders on to go into the factory, and it smells bad, and I don't like going. It's that is a very real problem, right? And it's not really a problem until people have problem. We get called in, basically, right? That's the truth of it. So, and I know that was a big old rant, so apologies for that. But I think, even though the name is slightly, that they've got to have a name that catches all of these different things. And I think the big thing to also call out with Defender for Cloud, just quickly, is multi-cloud, because Microsoft is effectively going, you know what, you won't put all your workloads in Azure, but we'll sure, look at them for you, and secure them and remediate them for you remotely, right? So Microsoft have, with Defender for Cloud, I mean, there's as many, if not more, updates to GCP than AWS than anything else, right? In that workload. So I think it's vitally important that people understand that Microsoft is building a system that is, I'll call it, platform or cloud agnostic. You know, right? If you do have VMs in AWS because that's what your product team likes to build in, then, as a security team, you can get visibility and control of those systems. There's not some extra set of tooling to learn and understand, right? It's all in one place, which is very powerful.
and and again, it's rapidly deployed, isn't it? And again, you don't have to have multiple vendors to look after it, and helps. It kind of feels like, at least with uh, the Microsoft offering, because we understand this. So I don't know what other offerings look like. They're going to be fairly similar, but I've not researched them. So, but it definitely does feel like the small businesses can have that enterprise grade like security without having to pay for like the biggest like appliance, that the minimum appliance can do 5,000 users. you
Yeah,
know
exactly. Yeah.
as an example, this is saying, well, if you've got 20 people, then that's great. You just pay for,
Yeah, well, I
yeah.
think I think as well, it's what other big, like really big company, like of the big cloud providers, is doing multi-cloud? Who else do we know has got a multi-cloud CSPM offering that isn't an independent company? Like, and it's got a, you know an integration, so deeply in, with many different products. It is, from that perspective, it is rather unique. I mean, not in its totality. I'm not saying that it's, it's really effective, and I'm a big fanboy of it. But as a singular solution from a very, like, large organization, some people might not be into Microsoft, and that's also okay, right? Because, as much as people love them, there's also as many people that don't love them, right? Um so that's okay as well. But I think, organizations that, you know primarily use Microsoft's products, it's kind of a, um like let's call it a natural, like, place to look, right? If you're using Exchange and Outlook to if you've got the trust in Microsoft to run Exchange, whether that's on, office.com, whatever it is, or it's on prem, and you're in that ecosystem, it's safe to assume that those people would also be, you know um, trusting in Microsoft to run, the security aspects of their business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's probably worth saying as well that the 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 move to XDR, whichever product you're using, is a journey. There is no, we're not. There's no way that you could turn it on. Depending on the size of you, of course. If you're only like a one or two man or two person organization, it'd probably be very quick to turn all of it on. But generally, it's there are it's quite a few steps to take, and XDR starts with just having a couple of these products to cover you, and then you build on it. So it's definitely a journey to get to, because again, if you're deciding to go to a single um, vendor or product suite, then you are going to have to wait for those contracts to end and things like that to move over from move your AV or your EDR solution to Microsoft, or move away from your Mimecast to Microsoft Defender for Office capabilities. There is some of that as well, and again, there may be a question there or a decision about, and this we probably should talk about this earlier, but it's come up now, but or into my mind at least, that maybe there's a cost saving there. There's a possibility that if you haven't got these other vendors, you're already paying for most of the licensing, or it's not much of a lift, that you're actually going to save money, and you haven't got to employ potentially more people in specific areas. They can cover, maybe Microsoft as a group of people.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
it
yeah,
depends.
I've seen organisations save hundreds of pounds a month moving to E5 from disparate products, and we're not even talking about security. We're just talking about, you know, uh, unified um, email communication, SharePoint, like all of those different things that were being served by multiple different vendors, right? Because once your Slack Pro is kicked in, your air, like your cooling system is kicked in, because but then you actually look at it and go, actually, let's call it £60 a month. I don't know what it exactly is. I think it's like £58 a month or 50. I can't remember what the exact price is, but let's say £60 a month for E5. So suddenly starts to make sense when you've got all of these different SaaS products that you can. And like I said, that's not even talking about all of the other, like, because we're coming at it from a security perspective, because we're also because you could theoretically as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, because you're like the licensing guy here, because I'm not, right? So you could theoretically, could you buy all of this without could you just buy the security aspects of XDR for licensing? Would you have to buy everything else that comes with it?
From the Microsoft 365 Defender piece, think that you get most of it. You put me on the spot now, but I think you'll be able to get
I know, I'm sorry.
if you've got M365 E3, I think you can add the Microsoft 365 E5 security add-on, and that will have everything apart from Defender for Cloud, because that is
That's completely
consumption.
separate,
It's
isn't it? Yeah,
consumption
yeah, it's
anyway. But
consumption. Yeah,
as
yeah, but
far as I'm
that's
aware,
but
you
that's,
get
so yeah,
everything or majority of things that there aren't like extra SKUs, like the Microsoft Defender vulnerability management, because that's an add-on to Defender for Endpoint in effect.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah,
but there's few of those at the moment.
yeah. So that's what I'm saying is that, and I think you're right. I mean, that is going to be very different because when you do sometimes talk licensing, especially when there's like thousands of users there, like those bills do rack up quite a lot. But when you do sit down, and I think if you are consuming your licensing, which is very important as well,
Yes.
if you're willing to not just buy the licensing, but also to do the work to consume the full amount of that license, and and I think this is where the journey aspect of it comes in, right? Because this is not a you rush in and like in 2 days you've got your XDR in like a relatively large organization, right? You're going to have to take time to talk to that organization and work through with them, skill up, communicate, well, internal communication, like all sorts of different things you're going to have to do. But yeah, I think there is a possibility for that, definitely.
Okay, yeah, and then I guess the last piece on this was Sentinel, and we've kind of talked about Sentinel. What was it? 3 episodes away? Yeah, episode 17, where we talked about Microsoft Sentinel. It it is bringing those two products at least together with their alerts, and you can ingest the data as well if you want to. But you can then bring in your other sources like your firewalls and your other infrastructure that isn't capable of getting the logs from Defender for Cloud, etc., into that single place. So then you've got your full holistic view of your environment.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And would it be fair to say that Sentinel is then the orchestration and the management plane for all of these different things, right? You know, if you've got your playbooks, you've got, because playbooks can be complex, but they can also be relatively trivial, like, um, send an email to somebody, open a ticket in a ticket system, alert somebody, do all those different things, right? But Sentinel's giving you, like I talked about before, that glue that Sentinel gives you for bringing these different sources together. That glue is going to be also vital in this perspective as well, right? To bring in those third party sources that you're probably going to have in your organization. Because Microsoft, give me a product that Microsoft doesn't create. They don't create switches, do they? Microsoft, right? So you can't, like if you've got switching gear and you want to, or firewalls, if that makes on-prem firewalls, you might have. It's chances are you're going to have you are going to have a third-party solution for that, aren't you? That's going to be you're going to have to feed that in somewhere, you know, to get visibility of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's um should we talk through some sort of the highlight? I think we've talked a lot about these benefits anyway, but can we just talk through some of the highlight benefits of XDR from what we've seen and what we've got? Alan, do you want to take us through this?
Yeah, sure. So, like we said, we talked about it's the visibility across the product suite. So we haven't got to worry about trying to bring them into Sentinel and things like that, but also Sentinel's bringing in the other sources that aren't native. Um, the alert management, so those two, Defender, Microsoft 365 Defender and Defender for Cloud has their own sort of ticketing or incident management pieces in them. So, like we said, they can be like XDRs on their own, um, but they can enhance or you can enrich the data if it's that you push them into Sentinel because then they can be correlated with other data sources. Um, Automation, so there is machine learning in there about usual behavior and as well as what's happening within the environment overall. So without just seeing it from a single place or a single product, and then Sentinel trying to put it all together, it knows about the other products. It's designed to know, so it's able to see that lateral movement and things like that. Increased efficiency. So because they're all talking to each other, the logs are all going the same place. It's able, the machine learning's kicking in. Some of that remediation, the automatic instant remediation is kicking in and doing most of the work where it can. And then where it can't, then it's when it gets pushed up to Sentinel for other remediation or where we need to do a sanity check. Like, I do want to isolate the device from the network or these devices. Um, and yeah, real time detection, threat detection as it's happening because we can see the whole environment. Where when data's coming, what when emails are coming in to the system, how they're being opened, where that may be executing, and then exactly as I said before, we can see it taking place, and then we can try and disrupt it as the potential attack's happening. Is there anything else, Sam, that I've missed?
No, I think that's it. I think we've talked about them as we've gone through. To be totally honest with you, because we sort of just, were I think, all of this technology is only going to be driven by value, right? It's always a value exchange, right? Whenever you're
Hmm.
deciding to take on something, you're gonna decide to go down the path of XDR. That's going to be work for you, right? And you've got to trade that investment with some return on it, right? So, but yeah, I think those benefits really do outline the main reasoning of why you would go down this path.
Yeah, and I think just one more thing is that, from the Microsoft perspective, at least, this is scalable. You do that piece of um, build at the start, build that configuration, and then as you deploy to the organization, you're just literally deploying it at that point. There's no extra bits you have to configure on the way per se. It
Yeah,
is a sort of engagement to build, and then depends doesn't matter how big you are, that piece of work is done.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%.
Okay, then. So, Sam, what's some of the challenges then? Because it's all right saying everything is benefits, and that there are challenges with putting XDR in.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the first one, and we've touched on this briefly from the other aspect of it, but if you've not currently got, these pieces of technology in your organization, um, then there is going to be an extra cost for you. As nice as Microsoft is, they are a company. They exist to make money for their shareholders. So we do have to also approach this with an element of um, empathy and caution to say our customers, right, as a partner. It's all well and good us standing on our soapbox and saying you should do X, Y, and Z, right, and you should have all of these workloads turned on and all of those different things, and then those organizations going, well, that's going to add tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds of extra overhead to our security spend. Let's say some organizations will be at a point where they say that's absolutely fine. We understand that we need to the world that we live in. We need to protect these systems, and we need to make that investment. But quite rightly so, other organizations will push back and say, do I really need this? Is this really going to help me? Now, if XDR, if you check every single box on XDR and you're a 10 out of 10 or 100 out of 100 or whatever, crude ranking system we want to make up for this analogy, um, I think as Alan's mentioned, the other side of that is it is a journey, but it's also a journey in terms of how much that you want to invest. Maybe for your organization, 30% of the workloads, enabling will be enough for you. Maybe you're a SaaS company and Defender for Cloud is really what you're most concerned about at the moment. Maybe your main focus is, your cloud infrastructure, making sure that your company's, if you're a SaaS company, then your SaaS data is probably the most important thing to you. That's probably part of your intellectual property and the value of your business. So maybe you start off with just Defender for Cloud, and maybe that's just consumption based. Maybe you add on, some extra cost to your infrastructure to start off there, and then maybe you slowly work through the other Defender products. Or maybe actually, it's the other way around for you. Maybe you're a business that sells, I don't know, let's say you sell insurance or something like that. Maybe you use a third party system to, log, some sort of third party. I don't know how insurance is sold or managed. So let's just say there's an ERP system that you use. Maybe that you just pay for that. And maybe it's actually your IT that you need to look at, your endpoint, security and things like that. So different organizations are going to have different priorities in terms of what they're focusing on. And there is only so much time in the day and only so much money. So they do have to prioritize that. So I think approaching XDR in a framework like methodology and a best practice sort of viewpoint, but also being supportive to your customers and also to your own organization about what their journey looks like. I think that's really important because being grown up about it, there isn't unlimited money, so we have to, and unlimited time, we have to prioritize. And so lots of technology to onboard as well. So it's not just the price of your monthly price of these things. You've also got an onboarding cost. Defender for Endpoint does not get rolled out by itself, right? It has that some work by somebody that knows what they're doing has to occur. I mean, that's really generic the way that I've described it there, but something does need to happen. You need to build it. So you either need to pay a partner to come in, you either need to hopefully have people inside your organization that know it. That would be a great bonus, or you need to pay to get them skilled up, in that new technology. So I think we've also and that cost to implement, to upskill, and to manage can dwarf the license cost. You think, getting an extra £15 a month per user is hard work, but orchestrating that and getting it across the line can be very complex, especially when you're working with a third, like if you're an organization working with a third party, like a partner, bringing them in and integrating them into your business, can be a challenge. You've got different viewpoints, different assumptions and different drivers, that can be complex. Um, but I think that's why Microsoft have built their partner ecosystem. They want businesses to understand that they do have options, of people to turn to. They're not all alone. Um, and what we've so on the other side of that is, you may have one of these. Let's say you've got an existing EDR solution. It could be any of them because there are many. Maybe you have an existing EDR solution. How do you go through replacing that, and what process do you go through? Because you could have technologists inside your business which are very pro your current offering. Let's say your current EDR, everybody knows like the back of their hand, they're really happy with it, and all of those different things. Um, and trying to go through a process of Microsoft XDRing that system could be a challenge. So just understanding that and replacing them. Not to mention like license. I think Alan mentioned it. Like licensing, you could be on like a 3-year deal for your XDR, your EDR. So you might not even be in a position where you can onboard that part of it. That's where we talk about a journey. You might say we're going to start off with Defender for Cloud because maybe you don't have a CSPM and protective workload solution on in the cloud, because they are, I would say, more rare than say something like EDR, right? Um, so you might start off in one area and then move to another. So um, Microsoft's marketing would tell you that you need all of these things turned on, which, best practice, 10 out of 10. This is, your North Star. This is where you need to get to. But again, just to bang the point home, I've said it so many times, and Alan's already said it, but it is a journey. And then the last thing is when you start to a challenge that I see is full. I'll call it full Microsoft alignment. Right, it sounds like Starship Troopers or something like that, right? Or Ready Player One, or something like that. It's some sort of dystopian future. But if you imagine full Microsoft alignment can be a big challenge. Alan and I are, big. I call it Microsoft fanboys. We're on board with that only because our brains would explode if we could even like move outside of like just one singular ecosystem. So having one singular ecosystem is amazing because you do get great integration. Um, tight ecosystems. If you talk about your iOS, iOS and to some extent Android as well, because they do a good job of having Google do a great job of having a joined up ecosystem, right? Once you're inside of one single ecosystem, it can be really great because things talk and things and happen nicely together. But when you do have to integrate with other third party systems, you may have to plug some of those gaps, and that could add a bit of, I'll call it, frustration into your building of solutions, right? Because Alan's example of disabling an on-prem account needing some scripts and some bits and bobs in between, you might still have to do some of that because Microsoft's XDR solutions are just fully integrated into its own product suite. If you then want to then enact, some sort of like, network protection, on prem, then you're going to have to, you're potentially going to have to join that up yourself, unless there is an current, Sentinel or Logic Apps integration there ready to go. Anything else, Alan, that you think I've missed in terms of challenges?
No, I think you've covered them. There's you're right. It's there is an element of hearts and minds, definitely,
Yeah, yeah, I
with it
think that's a
all.
great way of putting it. Yeah, definitely, 100%. And that is going to be there forever. Not just in that is not even just an XDR conversation, right? Maybe we should have a. No, I'm not having an episode on that, to be totally honest with you. But yes, yeah, lots of cooks, and there's only one broth, right? I think that's
Well,
100%
yeah, and
definitely.
it's the whole
Yeah,
question about all eggs in one basket and that sort of scenario about your
yeah,
security as well.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
it's that whole thing of, yeah, they are all there, but they all talk to each other. Everything that doesn't is all separate doesn't talk to each other very
yeah.
well.
Well, everybody is going to approach security in a different way,
Yes.
right? Like, and everybody's going to have a different viewpoint. Some people are going to take the pain of having, multiple products and having to like glue them together, as they'll accept that pain for the benefit is that they are, spreading their their risk around, aren't they? That they will do that. They will go and appoint different vendors for different things to like isolate each vendor from themselves, not to do this like fully joined up solution. But we can see that there is many benefits, not just in XDR but just Seam in general, right? To kind of glue those systems, back together. I think what Microsoft's saying here is don't bother with the glue, just use our solutions, deploy them, which can be a challenge in itself. Um, not because of Microsoft's doing, but because of the real world, things are a challenge. Um, and we'll do the glue for you, you know. But in order to do that, you have to, be in our ecosystem, which I think is a fair cop, to be totally honest with you.
And
Um, yeah,
yeah, and I know we're obviously talking from this sort of view of XDR from the Microsoft perspective because we're in this ecosystem, but uh, other XDR solutions and putting everything in one basket is going to be the same thing. It's not. There are some other products that do similar things, not necessarily everything that Microsoft's doing at the moment, but talking about identity and EDR and things like that, all in one sort
yeah,
of suite of products to build an XDR that is there as well. So it's not just that challenge of coming to Microsoft and bringing in one vendor there. It could be another vendor as well. So it is quite generic, that sort of thought process.
yeah, definitely, yeah, 100%, 100%. Right, should we wrap this one up because we're at. We try and aim for a 45-minute episode, but it never happens. For the next season, we're definitely going to have to change that and just accept that they're going to have to be at least an hour long, right? Like, because
that
it's
that
just
or
it's
that or gonna have to
ridiculous.
have like a tone or something in the background that comes on that we can put
Yeah,
on to say,
exactly.
right, you got
Yeah,
5 minutes now. That's it. You're going.
exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, if you have been listening, thanks for tuning into XDR because it is for us it's a relatively new topic, and I think from our perspective we're very excited for what XDR is going to bring to the security landscape. So Alan, what are we doing in our next episode?
So the actual final episode of season 2 is going to be our season finale. So that's going to be just us recapping, this year's. In fact, it's only been this year. This year's episodes, or what we've been, what fun we've had in the background of trying to get this stuff out, this content out, and things like
Yeah,
that. So I think it's going to be,
yeah.
it's more casual, less, definitely not technical. Hopefully. um,
Yeah, well, I think we'll talk about some sort of behind the scenesy sort of bits. Let's pull some weird and wonderful stats out of the analytics and things like that. And then yeah, we'll just do a brief recap of each of the topics that we talked about, um, and also our sort of plans for season 3, maybe with some teasers on topics that we're going to cover and sort of what we're going to do in the downtime to make the podcast as good as it can be. So, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many more topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
we also have the ability for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Do you disagree? Is there anything we missed? Um, there will be a link in the show notes for you to a form that allows you to give some feedback. Your feedback, as Sam said, helps us uh, build season 3.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives us the support and the the kick in the backside to get us onto the microphones every week. So thank you ever so much for everybody that's listened to, and we will have a wrap up. But thank you ever so much if you've been listening through the through this season. We do see the analytics. We do see your support. It is very much appreciated. It's very very humbling. That's for sure. Okay, thanks, Alan, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Yep, thanks, Sam, and speak to everyone soon. Bye.